At my birthday dinner, a waitress slid me a note. Leave before Halloween midnight. 5 minutes later, I arrived at the restaurant that night, feeling smaller than I had ever felt before. It was supposed to be my 85th birthday dinner, yet the room they chose for me felt like a waiting area rather than a celebration. No flowers, no balloons, no cake with flickering candles. My daughter Pamela sat at the head of the table with her husband, Dr. Richard Jameson, a man who had built a reputation as a psychologist but never once tried to understand me. My son Thomas slouched in his chair, glaring at his phone between bites, and my grandson Ethan stared at me with a mixture of boredom and irritation. It was quiet, except for the sound of cutlery scraping against plates and the low hum of other diners in the distance. On the table, between the silverware and the breadbasket, sat a neat stack of legal papers and a silver pen, like an invitation to sign away everything I had built in my life. Richard's voice broke the silence with that practiced tone of his, part doctor, part salesman. Mother, this is just a simple authorization form. We want you to rest. Let us handle the property for you. His words were coated in sugar, but the intent behind them was cold steel. Thomas cut in, voice sharp, eyes flashing. You are old. What are you managing for anyway? Stop making things harder for us. I lowered my eyes to the document. The first line read, Transfer of all property and legal rights. My heart clenched. This was not a temporary authorization. This was the erasure of my name from my own life. I could feel my fingers tremble, but I stayed quiet. That was when a young waitress approached, moving with the kind of hesitancy that told me she had overheard more than she should have. She wore the standard black and white uniform, her hair pulled back neatly, no name tag pinned to her chest. She placed the bill gently on the table, and as she did, slipped a small folded piece of paper between my napkin and the edge of my plate. Her eyes flicked up to mine for just a heartbeat before she turned away. Thomas noticed the movement. He slammed his hand on the table and snapped at her. Hey, you are just a waitress, do your job. Or maybe you don't need a tip tonight? His voice carried across the room. The young woman froze. She took a step back, bowing her head slightly, her hands clasped in front of her apron. I noticed something strange. Her gaze lingered on me a little too long, not with pity, but with a kind of recognition, like she knew who I was before I even sat down. Thomas pushed back his chair, face flushing red, and stood. What are you hiding? Do you think you can meddle in our business? His arm lifted, palm open, about to strike. I stood quickly, stepping between them without thinking. His hand swung through the air and cracked against my cheek. The sting exploded across my skin. The room went silent, except for the thud of my heart. I stumbled back into my chair, my hand pressed to my face. No one moved. No one reached for me. Pamela only murmured, eyes still on her wine glass. Mother, do not make a scene. It is your own fault for interfering. I sat there, dizzy from the blow, the taste of humiliation on my tongue. My son had raised his hand to another woman and struck his own mother, and still no one apologized. I forced my hands to stop shaking long enough to unfold the paper the waitress had slipped me. The handwriting was small and slanted, but clear. Leave before Halloween midnight. They forged your signature already. I read it once, twice. My breath caught in my chest. The edges of the note dug into my palm as if trying to wake me from a long sleep. For a moment I could not hear the clinking of glasses or the whispers at the table. All I could hear was the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. 5 minutes later, as I sat there frozen, I heard Richard's voice drift from the hallway just outside the private room. He thought I was still at the table. He thought I was deaf, old, oblivious. She will not even know she signed it twice, he said into his phone, his tone stripped of its usual polish. Just file it under her maiden name. You get your cut, I get the house. Each word felt like a nail driven into a coffin I had not agreed to enter. I pressed the note against my chest, the sting of my son's hand still burning on my face, and for the first time in years I felt something heavier than shame rising inside me. It was not fear. It was not confusion. It was the slow, quiet certainty that I was done being their victim. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening." I sat there at that table, their silver pen glinting beside the stack of papers, and realized the truth. This was not my birthday dinner. This was an ambush, and they had no idea I had just been warned. That night, I sat awake by the window, the sting on my cheek a constant reminder. "They forged your signature already." The words would not let me sleep. The next afternoon, I returned to the restaurant. Not for answers. I knew I would not get any from the ones I had raised. I came hoping to find the girl, the waitress who dared to speak when everyone else stayed silent, but she was not there. A different staff member greeted me. They said no one by that description worked their regular shifts. No name, no number. It was like she had disappeared. I walked toward the small park down the street, unsure of why. Maybe I just needed air, maybe my feet moved before my mind could object. And then, like something out of a story I would have never believed if told, I saw her. She sat alone on a bench near the duck pond, coat pulled tight, a paperback in her lap. I recognized the braid in her hair before I recognized her face. She looked up, startled as I approached, but her expression softened when she saw me. "You came," she said softly, as if she had been waiting. I nodded. "You warned me. I owe you more than I can say." She patted the space beside her. I sat, wincing slightly as the bruise on my face flared up. She noticed, her hands clenched in her lap. "He hit you," she said. "Not a question, a statement." "I stepped in the way," I replied. "That is all." "No," she said, "that is not all, but it is why I gave you that note." We sat in silence for a moment, the ducks gliding silently over the dark water. Then she spoke again. "My name is Elena Barrett." The name froze something in my chest. I turned slowly to her, afraid to ask, afraid to hope. "Barrett?" She nodded. "My father was Samuel Barrett." Samuel. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in more than 50 years. He had been my first love, my better self. The boy who smelled like old books and lavender soap, who made me believe in something as foolish as forever. "My father and mother were killed in a car accident 3 years ago," Elena continued. "Drunk driver. They were coming home from a church fundraiser." I covered my mouth. The world seemed to tilt. I never knew." "He carried a piece of you with him," she said. "Even after all those years, he kept a lavender scarf in his drawer. My mother knew. She never hated him for it. She said some people stay with you even when they're gone." I could not speak. My throat burned. Elena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded clipping, worn and soft at the edges. She handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, my letter, published in 1,997 inches, the Letters to Lost Love section of an old lifestyle magazine. I had written it on a whim, under a pseudonym, one quiet summer night when memories felt too heavy to carry alone. "I never signed my name," I whispered. "No," Elena smiled. "But he knew. He recognized your words. He said, 'She still remembers me the way I remember her.' He read that letter at least once a month." I stared at the paper. My words stared back. Elena looked at me with a kind of reverence I had not seen in years. Not pity, not condescension, respect, recognition. "I know I am not family," she said. "But when I saw what they were doing to you, I could not stay silent. I would not have forgiven myself. My father would not have either." I nodded slowly. The sky above us was beginning to darken, clouds stretching like bruises across the horizon. "Thank you," I said, "for more than the warning, for reminding me I existed before they tried to erase me." She looked at me, her eyes shining. "You still do. You are still here." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. We sat on that bench until the streetlights flickered on, 2 women with more history between them than most blood relations. One born from my past, one perhaps meant to be part of my future. When I stood to leave, she said gently, "He used to say, 'Some people you do not get to marry, but they still teach you what love really means.'" I turned to her and smiled through my tears. He was right. It was not the first time they had tried to silence me. The note, the forged signature, the sting of Thomas's hand, None of it had come out of nowhere. It was simply the latest chapter in a much older book, a book they thought I had burned or forgotten. But I remember everything, especially 1978. That was the year we buried my first grandchild. She was barely 4 years old. A quiet little girl named Annabelle, who loved to hum when she played with her wooden puzzles, and who called me Mimi with a lisp that melted my heart every time. They said she died from complications related to a congenital condition, that it was in her genes. A weak child from the start, the doctor, my own son-in-law's father, had said. Dr. Harold Hollingsworth, a man who walked like God wore his white coat, a man whose word was treated like scripture in our family. But I had seen things. I had seen him sneak small, unlabeled vials into Pamela's diaper bag. Just vitamins, he would say, patting my hand like I was an old woman too fragile to understand. Smart supplements, ahead of their time. I was 38 then, sharp, steady, and not the kind of woman who ignored a mother's instinct. I questioned him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. "Why are you giving her those pills, Harold?" I asked him one evening after dinner. He looked at me over his bifocals, his smile thin and practiced. "Diana, you worry too much. She is my granddaughter. Would I ever give her something that could harm her?" But the way he said it, slow, deliberate, like he was talking to a patient who had wandered out of the dementia ward, made my skin crawl. When Annabelle got sick, I begged them to stop giving her those vitamins. I stood in Pamela's kitchen with a shaking hand, holding up one of those little brown bottles. "They are not vitamins," I told my daughter. "You do not even know what they are." Pamela snatched it out of my hand and threw it into the trash. "You are paranoid," she snapped. "You have always been paranoid." When Annabelle died, they closed ranks, closed their ears, closed their eyes. I told the coroner about the supplements. He dismissed me gently, like a nurse humoring a senile patient. I told Richard. He said I needed rest. I told Harold again. He said, "Diana, grief does strange things to the mind. You need help." And then, 3 days later, they had me committed. "Just for observation," they said. "Just for a short stay. We are worried about your mental health, Diana. You need to process your grief." The next thing I knew, I was in a sterile white room with no shoelaces, being given pills I did not want, being asked questions I did not know how to answer. 3 months. 3 months of hell, where I learned the quickest way to be dismissed forever was to speak the truth too plainly. When I came back, I was no longer Mimi. I was the one who lost it, the one we need to keep an eye on. My children looked at me like I was a ticking bomb. My husband, well, he was already halfway out the door by then. The institution was just a convenient excuse to pack his bags and go. They thought I would break. But what they did not know was that silence is its own kind of sharpening. I stopped speaking, and I started documenting. I kept journals, spirals hidden in the attic, notes tucked in recipe books. I wrote down dates, symptoms, behaviors. I copied labels from every pill bottle I could find. And then I bought a tape recorder. Not a big one, just a small handheld device with plastic buttons that clicked too loudly. I would leave it on during family dinners, during hospital visits, during private conversations they thought I was too slow to follow. I recorded everything, not because I had a plan, but because something inside me knew the truth always leaves footprints. I kept those tapes in a cedar box beneath the floorboards of the linen closet. They became my lifeline, my protection, my proof. They wanted to make me the crazy old woman in the attic, but I was never crazy. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to be wrong so they could feel right. Years passed. The tapes collected dust, but I never threw them away. Because I knew, one day, someone would ask. Someone would listen. And when that day came, I would be ready. They called it a private dinner, a chance to reconnect, as Pamela had said over the phone with that tone of forced cheerfulness she wore like perfume. I did not ask where we were meeting. I already knew. The same restaurant, the same walls, the same velvet chairs that bore witness to the first time my son struck me. But this time, I was ready. Elena was working that night. She greeted me with a quiet nod, no words exchanged, Her eyes asked a question. "Are you sure?" I gave the smallest nod in return. Yes. The family was already seated. Richard stood to pull out my chair, the gentleman mask securely fastened again. "Mother," he smiled, "you look well." I ignored the comment, and Saturday they ordered for me before I could speak, a bland soup and tea. I noticed the waiter didn't even ask me what I wanted. It was decided for me. "Let's just go through this quickly," Thomas said, pulling out a folder. "No stress, no drama. We just need your signature on the last page." I said nothing. Pamela pushed the folder toward me like a bill I was overdue in paying. "It's the same paperwork, just a final confirmation. Nothing's changed." Richard leaned closer, producing a small bottle from his coat pocket. "Before we begin," he said with that syrupy concern he reserved for manipulating others, "I brought your memory supplements. You forgot them last week." He poured 2 small pills into his palm and placed them beside my soup spoon. "You said they were helping with the clarity. This will just make things smoother." I stared at the pills. Small, pink, and identical to the ones they had tried to force on me months earlier. "I am not taking that," I said calmly. "Mother," Pamela chided, "let's not do this again." Richard smiled wider, but his eyes were dark. "Diana, these are standard supplements. We all want to help you." I said no. The room froze. Richard's hand, still hovering near the folder, slowly curled into a fist. Then, without warning, he brought it down hard on the table. The impact shattered a wineglass near his plate. Shards scattered across the linen tablecloth. A red line opened on his knuckle. Pamela gasped. Thomas pushed back his chair, startled. And then Ethan, my grandson, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the boy who used to draw me crayon pictures of dragons and castles, stood and shouted, "Ba lam ka nyane lon len. Ba dien roy." He said it so casually, so decisively, as if it were fact, as if I was a nuisance they had been patient with for too long. No one corrected him. Elena stood in the background near the service station, pretending to rearrange silverware. Her phone was tilted slightly, lens pointed toward the table, recording, quietly, carefully. Elena later told me she had come prepared. She had seen the fear in my eyes that night at the birthday dinner, and something told her this would not be the last time I would need saving. She had seen enough. I stood slowly, my hands steady this time. I looked at each of them, my children, my blood, and saw only strangers wearing familiar faces. "This is the last meal we will ever share," I said quietly. Pamela scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." Richard wiped his bloody knuckle with a napkin, not even looking at me. "She'll change her mind. She always does." I turned and walked away, my spine straighter than it had been in years. Behind me, their voices tangled into murmurs, blame-shifting like ash in the wind. Elena met me at the exit. She whispered, "I got everything." "Good," I said. "I want the truth to have a voice this time." As we stepped into the night, the cold air hit my cheeks, and I realized something strange. I was smiling. They thought I was broken. They thought they had won. But what they did not know was that madness does not live in the mind. It lives in the lies people tell to stay comfortable, and I was done being their excuse. This would be the last time they called me crazy. The last time they rewrote my story while I sat quietly in the corner. Now I had what they never expected: witnesses, evidence, and a plan. Elena and I sat in the quiet warmth of my living room, the kind of quiet that only comes when 2 people trust each other enough not to fill every silence. She was sipping the lavender tea I had taught her to make, Samuel's favorite, and we were going through some of my old letters and photos when she paused, eyes locked on a faded picture on the wall. It was a painting, lavender fields in bloom, soft strokes of purple fading into dusk. It had hung above my bed for as long as I could remember. Samuel had given it to me once, back when dreams felt closer than disappointments. Elena leaned in, her brow furrowed. "He used to mention this," she whispered. "He said once, in passing, that the girl he loved kept secrets in the lavender." I blinked. "He said that?" She nodded. "He said she was the kind of woman who would hide truth inside beauty, because no one would look there." I stood, heart racing. I had never really thought about it, not in years. The frame was old, the corners dust softened, but something about it suddenly felt hollow. I lifted it from the wall. It was heavier than it should have been. Gently, I peeled back the paper backing. There, wedged between the canvas and the wood, was a small cassette tape in a plastic case marked in pen. Fall 1978. My fingers trembled. I had long forgotten this tape existed. I thought it might have been lost, or maybe I had convinced myself it had never existed at all. I handed it to Elena. "That's the year they locked me up," I said. 3 months, after Annabelle died. We sat together on the floor as I pulled out the old cassette player from my closet. I had kept it, half out of nostalgia, half out of stubbornness. The machine clicked as I pressed play. The audio was faint at first, static, muffled voices. Then, slowly, it sharpened into the chillingly calm cadence of Harold Hollingsworth. I knew that voice. I had heard it testify in courtrooms, speak at conferences, bless our dinner tables like a priest of science. But this time, he was unguarded. "They're too young to remember," his voice said. "Small doses, mixed in with the regular vitamins. The parents won't notice unless they're looking." A pause. "We'll see early signs by 2 or 3. If the nervous system responds, they'll just call it developmental delay, maybe autism. Nothing traceable." Another voice, a younger man, unsure. "But what if the families ask questions?" Harold chuckled, low and dismissive. "They won't. The ones who do? We handle them. Like Diana. Emotional. Grieving." She imagined it. I pressed pause. Elena stared at the player like it might burn her hands. He knew exactly what he was doing," she said. "This wasn't an accident." I could not speak for a long moment. My heart was pounding in my ears. I had always believed something was wrong, that Annabelle hadn't died from natural causes, that the vitamins were never just vitamins. That Harold was using his own grandchildren as test subjects for whatever trial he could not get published. But no one believed me. They said I was making it up. They said I was fragile, unstable, grieving too hard. They drugged me, locked me away. My own husband signed the forms. My own daughter nodded along. Elena's voice broke through my thoughts. "You didn't forget," she said softly. "They made you doubt. That's different." My throat closed. Tears welled in my eyes. Not forgetting is a curse when the world demands you pretend it never happened. I looked down at the cassette. I had held the truth for years, yet lived like a liar. That is the power of manipulation, making you afraid of your own mind. But now, I had more than a memory. I had proof. "Can we copy this?" Elena asked. I nodded. "We'll make a digital version, burn it to a CD, save it on a USB, make sure it never disappears again." She gently placed the cassette back in its case like it was made of glass. "This changes everything," she said. Yes, I thought. It changes everything. They invited me back into the house as if nothing had happened. Pamela called and said they just wanted to finish everything with grace. She used words like closure and respect. I could hear Richard in the background rehearsing charm, his voice careful, low, controlled. I said yes. I dressed slowly that morning, a lavender brooch at my collar, my hair combed, my steps steady. Elena offered to come with me, but I told her no. This part I had to do alone. Not because I was afraid, but because I was no longer. Their living room was decorated like a brochure for forgiveness. Candles, light jazz, tea brewing on the table, untouched. They smiled too wide, spoke too softly. It was the performance of guiltless people trying to fake closure. Thomas stood near the fireplace. Ethan sat on the arm of a chair, arms crossed. Pamela and Richard flanked the coffee table, where the folder lay open. The same papers, the same pen. "Let's just do this calmly," Richard said. "One signature, and we'll all be free of this weight." I nodded, sat down slowly, took the pen in my hand. I let it hover over the page, long enough for them to start believing they had won. Then I looked up. "I brought something too," I said. Richard blinked. "What?" "A gift," I said. "A voice from the past. You'll want to listen closely." I reached into my bag and pulled out the portable speaker. Pressed play. The room filled with static, then cleared into Harold Hollingsworth's unmistakable voice. They're too young to remember. Small doses, mixed with vitamins. When the nervous system breaks down, they'll just call it autism. No one questions the grandfather. And Diana, she's emotional. The grieving kind. We'll institutionalize her if she resists. No one moved. Pamela's face turned the color of wet ash. Thomas took a step back. Richard reached for the speaker, but I pulled it out of reach. You used to think I was crazy, I said, voice steady. You locked me up. You stole my words. You turned my own daughter against me. Silence. Thick. Ugly. Ethan looked between his parents. Mom? His voice cracked. You knew? Pamela opened her mouth. No words came out. Ethan looked stunned, like the foundation of his life had cracked open. He didn't speak for the rest of the trial, but he never defended them again. Not once. Did you know? He asked again, louder. Pamela's eyes welled. She turned to Richard, then back to me. They said you were unstable. They said you imagined it. I didn't imagine a dead child, I said. Richard recovered his voice first. This changes nothing legally. This changes everything morally, I interrupted, and you know it. Elena had already made copies. The digital file had been backed up 5 times. There were emails scheduled. The truth had already taken flight. I stood. My hands didn't shake. My knees didn't wobble. I looked them in the eye, each of them. You tried to erase me, I said. You called me delusional because I was the only one awake, but I've never been clearer than I am now. Pamela whispered, you don't have to do this. We're family. No, I replied. You are people I gave birth to. That is not the same. Ethan stared at the ground, hands trembling. Thomas slinked out without a word. Richard muttered something under his breath about defamation, but even his voice was smaller now. I took the pen, signed nothing, and left the papers where they lay. I walked out of that house, the one they once called mine, then tried to steal, without looking back. Because some things don't deserve your attention once you finally see them clearly. They said I was senile. That I had episodes, hallucinations, long-standing emotional instability due to unresolved grief. They filed motions. They brought in lawyers. They tried to take away my legal autonomy, one piece of paper at a time, just like they had tried with my home. But I did not come to court alone. With Elena's help, I had found a legal aid group specializing in elder abuse cases. They saw my tapes, my journals, and they believed me before I even finished speaking. I came with Elena at my side. I came to the truth that I had waited nearly half a century to speak. The courtroom was sterile and cold, all steel edges and impersonal voices. The bailiff read the names like they were just labels, not the bones of my betrayal. Pamela Jameson, Dr. Richard Jameson, Thomas Hollingsworth. They sat behind their polished lawyers, dressed in deep blues and grays, trying to look respectable. Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. Pamela held tissues but didn't cry. Richard looked confident, at first. Their lawyer stood and claimed I was not of sound mind, that I had been institutionalized. That I had fantasies about conspiracies that had no basis in medical reality. That the tapes I brought were questionable. That I was being manipulated by an outsider. Elena. But they didn't expect Elena to be as prepared as she was. She took the stand. Calm, clear. Her voice never cracked. She introduced herself as a witness to emotional and physical abuse. I was working at the restaurant during Miss Hollingsworth's 85th birthday dinner, she said. I saw the man you call Dr. Richard Jameson raise his hand to strike me. He struck his mother-in-law instead. She played the video of the shattered wine glass, of the pills placed in front of me, of Ethan yelling, "She's crazy," while Richard smiled. She played the audio clip of Richard on the phone with my ex-husband. She won't even know she signed it twice. File it under her maiden name. You get your cut. I get the house. The court went still. The defense lawyer sputtered. There's no proof she's not manipulating the files. Then came the tapes. My tapes. From 1978. Just mix it into their vitamins. The dosage is small. When the nervous system responds, they'll just label it developmental delay. Elena handed over the original cassette. The court ordered it for forensic analysis. The tape was authentic. The voice matched Dr. Harold Hollingsworth's official recordings. The judge's expression began to change. Next came the autopsy. Elena had helped me file for a review of Annabelle's medical records. They had been dismissed at the time. Genetic, they said. But this time, the toxicology showed traces of a compound no longer legal. A neurochemical once considered for cognitive enhancement in infants, pulled from clinical trials after animal testing, showed devastating side effects. Harold had been one of the lead researchers. Annabelle had been his first test subject. I did not cry. I sat still as the room gasped, as the defense faltered, as my children's faces collapsed under the weight of what they always knew but never wanted to admit. Pamela was stripped of her guardianship over Ethan. Richard lost his medical license. The board cited gross ethical misconduct, violation of patient safety, and abuse of power. Thomas was placed under investigation for aiding in real estate fraud and elder financial abuse. The judge turned to me during final statements. "Miss Hollingsworth," he said, "do you have anything you wish to say?" I rose slowly. My hands no longer trembled. "You called me crazy," I said, my voice echoing louder than I expected. "You said I imagined things, that my grief made me dangerous. But it wasn't madness that killed Annabelle. It was silence. Yours." I turned to them. All three. "Crazy isn't seeing the truth," I said. "Crazy is knowing it and doing evil anyway." They didn't meet my eyes. Not once. But I stood taller than I had in years, because finally, the world had listened. We left the courtroom in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because justice has a weight that does not need to be spoken aloud. Elena held my hand, not like a granddaughter, not like a friend, but like something new, something chosen, something whole. I did not return to the old house. I did not pack. I did not call Pamela. She had shown me everything I needed to know. There are ties deeper than blood, and sometimes the truest family is the one that finds you when you have nothing left. A month later, I signed the papers. I made it official. Elena Barrett became, in the eyes of the law, my daughter. But in truth, she had already been that long before. Not through bloodline, but through loyalty, through presence, through the simple act of believing me when no one else would. We moved to a quiet lake house, not far from where Samuel used to take his family fishing. It had lavender by the porch, wild and untrimmed, the way I like it. The attic became our archive, a museum of memory. My old journals, the tapes, the letters no one read, the truth no one wanted. Elena labeled every shelf. 1978, the year of silence. 1986, the misdiagnosis years. 1997. The letter that was never answered. And finally, 2025, the year I spoke back. She called me Mama D. The first time she said it, I cried, not because of grief but because of peace. We made rituals. Every Thursday night, we listened to one tape, not to reopen wounds, but to remember why healing had to matter. Sometimes we sat quietly after, sometimes we screamed into pillows. Sometimes we laughed, because surviving horror doesn't mean you stop finding joy. We cooked together. Lavender chicken, Samuel's favorite. French onion soup, mine. We planted rosemary by the kitchen window. I taught her how to sew a hem, she taught me how to back up files to the cloud. Sometimes we danced. One morning, she painted a wooden sign and nailed it to the front porch. I read the words again and again until they were part of me. Elena and Diana, two voices that refused to be silenced. It made people stop. Neighbors asked questions. A local journalist came by once. We told her everything, not to shame, not to shock, but to remember. Because silence is not peace. Silence is how they hide you. Silence is how they bury you before you're dead. I spent years in that coffin. Elena opened the lid. I never heard from Pamela again. Not a card, not a call, not even after the ruling. Not even after I was officially listed as mentally sound and fully competent. I didn't need her to call. Because for the first time, I didn't need her approval to feel real. The world has a strange way of turning. The ones who break you often think they own the pieces. But I found my way back, not because I was strong, but because I was not alone. And in that final clip of the video, as the screen fades to black and the lake glimmers in the distance, I say what I had waited a lifetime to understand. They wanted me silent. They needed me small. But Elena reminded me, your voice does not disappear when people stop listening. It disappears only when you stop believing in it. I believe in mine now. And I believe in hers. We are not broken. We are not defeated. We are loud and living and free. They say some stories end with silence, some with a slam of a door, and some with a wedding march echoing across a lake at sunset. Ours ended with violins. It was a small ceremony, not grand, not expensive, but it was honest, and that made it richer than any ballroom reception I had ever been to. Elena wore a simple ivory dress with capped sleeves and a tiny lavender sprig pinned to her hair. Her partner, June, warm, brilliant, and the kind of person who makes a room feel like home, stood beside her, eyes brimming with tears before the vows even began. The wedding was held on the lawn, just behind our lake house. The same grass we once planted rosemary over, the same air that had carried our laughter on quiet evenings. There were folding chairs arranged in rows, neighbors, a few friends, people who had heard our story and stayed. And me. They asked me to sit in the front row. They gave me a seat no one could deny, not out of pity, not out of formality, but because they wanted me there. As a mother, as a witness, as the one who saw them before the world did. Elena held my hand before walking down the aisle. "Mama D," she whispered, "you made this possible." I smiled. "No," I told her. "You did. I just made sure you had the voice to say yes." The music began. Not a march, but a slow instrumental of Here Comes the Sunday, the kind of tune that feels like a promise instead of a performance. I watched her walk toward June, sunlight threading through her braid like gold. My heart ached, not with sadness, but with something deeper, a quiet kind of joy only possible after decades of grief. They read their own vows, no officiant speaking on their behalf, just truth between two women brave enough to love in the open. "I promise," Elena said, voice steady, "to believe you even when the world does not, to protect your joy like you protected mine, to never call you crazy for speaking your truth." I wiped my eyes, not because I was old, not because I was sentimental, but because I had never imagined I would live long enough to see love like that, spoken aloud without shame. After the ceremony, there was cake, real cake, with flowers and 3 tiers and a layer of lavender frosting that melted on the tongue. We danced. Yes, I danced. Slowly, and with a little help, but I danced. June's father spun me once and said, "You raised a hell of a woman." "I did not raise her," I corrected him. "She found me, and I just finally learned how to hold on." That night, under strings of fairy lights and the rising hush of lake water against the shore, Elena tapped a fork against her glass and stood. She looked radiant, confident, alive. "There's someone I need to thank," she said, her voice cutting gently through the air. "Not for helping plan the wedding or for the decorations, but for something bigger." She turned to me. "Mama D, you taught me that silence is a choice, and that truth, when spoken, can heal even the oldest scars. I was not born from your body, but I was born from your bravery. And today, I carry your name with pride." The guests clapped, but I could barely see them through my tears. For decades, I had been told to sit in the corner, to be quiet, to be just the grandmother, the problem, the liability, the shadow no one wanted in their photographs. But not this time. This time, I was in the picture. This time, I sat in the front row. And when they asked for a family photo, Elena pulled me in beside her, not behind her, not beside the cake, but center stage, right where I belonged. If there is a lesson to be found at the end of this story, it is not just about truth, or justice, or even survival. It is about this, that sometimes family is not the people you share your blood with. It is the people who hear your story and choose to stay anyway. That night, before we turned in, I looked out over the lake one last time. The water shimmered, moonlight catching every ripple like applause. I could almost hear Samuel's voice in the wind. She was always the kind of woman who saved herself. I whispered back, not just me anymore. And I closed the door. Home. Finally. If this story stirred something deep inside you, if it reminded you that truth, no matter how long buried, always finds its voice, then you're exactly where you belong. Here on Grandma True Stories, we tell the tales others tried to silence. Real voices, real betrayals, real justice, told by the quietest woman in the room. So if you believe wisdom doesn't age and revenge has no expiration date, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you never miss the next true story that was never meant to be heard. Thank you for listening, for remembering, for choosing not to look away. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and never let them rewrite your story.